The chains of subjugation. The ships arrived without warning on a spring morning in 2156, and the world stopped breathing. Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the observation room of the International Space Coordination Center in Singapore, watching as massive vessels materialized in Earth's orbit. They were beautiful in a terrible way, their hulls gleaming like polished obsidian, their size dwarfing anything humanity had ever constructed. For 3 generations, humanity had reached toward the stars, hoping to find friends among the cosmos. Instead, they found masters. The communication came through every device on Earth simultaneously. A being appeared on screens worldwide, its form vaguely humanoid but unmistakably alien. Its skin shimmered with colors that had no name in human languages, and its 3 eyes regarded Earth with the cold assessment of a merchant evaluating merchandise. It spoke in perfect English, though its voice carried harmonics that made listeners feel small and insignificant. "We are the Stellar Dominion," it announced. "For 12,000 years, we have maintained order across this galaxy. You are the newest species to reach the threshold of space travel, and thus you must take your place within the established structure. We have reviewed your capabilities and determined your classification. Humanity will serve as bound servants under Dominion law for a period of 100 standard cycles." The protests began immediately. World leaders demanded negotiations. The United Nations convened emergency sessions. Military forces across the globe went to high alert. But the Dominion did not negotiate. They simply waited. Within weeks, demonstration ships appeared in Earth's atmosphere, each one capable of obliterating entire cities with weapons humanity could barely comprehend. The message was clear: accept servitude or face extinction. Sarah Chen had been a cargo pilot, running supplies between Earth and the lunar colonies. She had dreamed of exploring the galaxy, of discovering new worlds and meeting alien civilizations. Now those dreams turned to ash as she watched her government sign the Treaty of Submission. The document was read aloud in the General Assembly, and every word felt like a nail being driven into humanity's coffin. Humans would provide labor across Dominion territory. They would have no property rights beyond Earth. They would serve where assigned without question or complaint. They were, in every meaningful sense, property. The selection process began within months. Dominion officials landed at major cities worldwide, bringing with them devices that scanned humans and categorized them according to aptitude. The strong went to mining operations on brutal frontier worlds. The intelligent became servants in Dominion households or assistants in research facilities. The beautiful were taken to entertainment districts. Children showing special talents were separated from their families and sent to training centers. Sarah watched as her younger brother was selected for technical training and shipped to a world called Viridian Nexus. She held him as he cried, promising she would find him again someday. It was a promise she intended to keep. Dr. James Morrison had been a leading researcher in xenobiology, ironically enough. He had spent his career studying the possibility of alien life, never imagining that first contact would come in the form of subjugation. At 53 years old, he was deemed too old for heavy labor but valuable enough for his knowledge. The Dominion assigned him to a medical facility on Krenthis Station, a massive orbital platform where humans worked alongside dozens of other servant species. On his first day, James saw the full horror of the Dominion system. Species from across the galaxy, all classified and categorized, all working for the benefit of their masters. Some had been servants for so long they no longer remembered freedom. Among the new arrivals was a young woman named Kai Torres. She was only 19, brilliant with engineering and systems design. The Dominion scanners had identified her aptitude immediately, and she was assigned to maintenance crews on the Dominion's vast infrastructure network. Kai had always been quiet, preferring machines to people, but in the cargo holds of the transport ships that scattered humans across the stars, she found her voice. She spoke to other young people like herself, scared and angry and desperate. She listened to their stories and remembered every detail. Names, skills, home cities, family members left behind. She began to understand that information was power, and she began to collect it systematically. Sarah Chen's assignment took her to the commercial shipping lanes. The Dominion operated a vast network of cargo vessels moving goods between thousands of worlds, and they needed pilots who could handle the dangerous routes through unstable space. Humans, they had discovered, had a talent for improvisation that made them valuable in high-risk positions. Sarah flew a battered freighter called the Distant Horizon, hauling everything from agricultural products to industrial machinery. Her Dominion supervisor, a being called Merchant Captain Vrel, treated her with casual cruelty, reminding her constantly that she was replaceable. But Sarah was learning. Every route she flew, she memorized. Every station she docked at, she observed. She noted the security protocols, the patrol patterns, the weaknesses in the Dominion's seemingly invincible infrastructure. And she talked to other human pilots when their ships crossed paths. In the brief moments they had together at refueling stations or cargo transfer points, they shared information. They spoke in codes and metaphors, building a language the Dominion could not understand. They were forming connections that would span light years. On Krenth's station, Dr. Morrison found himself working alongside other human medical personnel. The Dominion used them to treat servant species, considering it wasteful to use their own doctors on inferior beings. In the medical bays, James saw the full cost of the Dominion system. Workers injured in industrial accidents, often permanently disabled. Children suffering from diseases that the Dominion could cure but chose not to, considering the expense unjustified for servants. Elderly servants simply abandoned when they could no longer work efficiently. The casual cruelty was suffocating, but James forced himself to remain calm and professional. He treated every patient with dignity and remembered every injustice. One night, a human teenager was brought to the medical bay, nearly dead from exposure to toxic chemicals in a processing plant. The boy's supervisor had refused to provide proper safety equipment, considering it an unnecessary expense. James worked through the night to save the young man's life, using techniques the Dominion doctors had never considered. When the boy finally stabilized, he looked up at James with tears in his eyes and whispered a single word, "Remember." James understood. They would all remember. Every cruelty, every injustice, every life lost or broken. Memory would be their weapon. Kai Torres excelled at her assignments, quickly becoming one of the most reliable maintenance technicians on the infrastructure network. The Dominion overseers praised her efficiency and gave her access to increasingly critical systems. They never suspected that she was doing far more than simple repairs. With every system she touched, Kai learned its secrets. She understood how the power grids functioned, how the communication networks operated, how the security systems were structured. More importantly, she began to see the flaws. Every complex system has vulnerabilities, and the Dominion systems were ancient and complacent. They had not been seriously challenged in millennia. Kai began making small modifications during her maintenance work. Nothing obvious, nothing that would trigger alerts. Just tiny changes in code, minor adjustments to hardware, backup systems that should not exist. She documented everything in encrypted files hidden within the network itself. And she taught other human technicians to do the same. They formed a network within the network, invisible to their masters, growing stronger with each passing year. As the first decade of servitude passed, something unexpected happened. The Dominion began to rely heavily on human labor. Humans worked harder than most species, adapted faster to new situations, and showed remarkable resilience under conditions that broke other servants. The Dominion congratulated themselves on acquiring such valuable property. They never noticed that they were becoming dependent on the very beings they had enslaved. Sarah Chen flew her routes with perfect obedience, but she was building something in the shadows. At every station, she made contact with other humans. She carried messages hidden in cargo manifests, encoded in shipping schedules, buried in maintenance logs. She helped establish communication networks that spanned hundreds of worlds. The Dominion monitored all official channels, but they could not see the web humans were weaving in the spaces between their attention. Dr. Morrison became known among the servant populations as a healer who could work miracles. He saved lives the Dominion had written off as losses. He taught other human medical personnel techniques that combined Earth medicine with alien technology in ways the Dominion had never imagined. And he quietly documented every technological advantage the Dominion possessed, every biological weakness in the ruling species, every medical vulnerability that might someday prove useful. Knowledge, he understood, would be crucial when the time came. 20 years became 30, then 40. A new generation of humans grew up never knowing Earth as a free world. But the older generation refused to let them forget. In servant quarters across the galaxy, elders told stories of humanity's history. They spoke of revolutions and resistance movements, of empires that had fallen and tyrants who had been overthrown. They taught the young ones to be patient, to learn everything they could, to prepare for a day that might never come but had to be imagined anyway. Sarah Chen was 56 years old when she received a message that changed everything. It came through the hidden network, encrypted and fragmented, but unmistakable in its meaning. Earth had not been idle during the decades of servitude. In the quarantined solar system, cut off from galactic trade and left to rot by the Dominion, humanity had been building. They had taken the technology smuggled back by returning workers and improved it. They had constructed shipyards in the asteroid belt and assembly facilities on the moons of Jupiter. They had trained crews and manufactured weapons. They had been preparing for war. The message gave a timeline. 5 more years. In 5 years, Earth would be ready to strike. Every human in the galaxy needed to be prepared to act when the signal came. Sarah sat in her tiny quarters on the distant horizon and felt hope burn in her chest for the first time in decades. She immediately began spreading the word through her network. 5 years. They had 5 years to finalize their plans. Dr. Morrison received the same message on Krenthus Station. He gathered his most trusted colleagues, humans who had worked beside him for decades, and they began to prepare. They had been stockpiling medical supplies and medications, claiming losses to accidents and bureaucratic errors. They had been training younger humans in combat medicine, disguising it as standard medical education. Now they intensified their efforts. When the fighting came, and it would come, they would be ready to save as many lives as possible. Kai Torres was 34 years old, a senior infrastructure specialist with access to systems across multiple sectors. When the 5-year warning arrived, she knew exactly what needed to be done. She had spent 15 years building backdoors into Dominion systems, planting dormant code that waited for activation. Now she began the final phase. She recruited other human technicians, carefully vetting each one, building a team that could coordinate simultaneous strikes across hundreds of worlds. They called themselves the Prometheus Network, named after the ancient human who had stolen fire from the gods. The Dominion noticed nothing. To them, humans remained obedient servants who had accepted their place. The ancient species had grown comfortable with human labor, dependent on human skills, confident in their eternal superiority. They saw human efficiency as proof of good management, never recognizing it as preparation for rebellion. They heard human languages evolving and changing but dismissed it as the natural drift of primitive cultures. They did not understand that humans were building a language specifically designed to be incomprehensible to alien ears. As the 5 years counted down, the preparation intensified across the galaxy. Human pilots mapped every shipping route and military patrol pattern. Human technicians identified every critical system and vulnerable point. Human medical staff learned the biology of every Dominion species, understanding their weaknesses as well as their strengths. Human servants in Dominion households listened to every conversation, learning secrets their masters shared freely in front of beings they considered no more intelligent than furniture. Sarah Chen made one final cargo run before the signal date, transporting supplies to a remote mining colony. She used the opportunity to meet with resistance leaders from 6 different worlds, coordinating final details. They spoke in the new human language, a flowing mixture of Earth tongues that sounded like casual conversation but carried complex tactical information. They confirmed targets and timing, verified communication protocols, and made their peace with the possibility that many of them would not survive what was coming. On the night before the signal was scheduled to transmit, Sarah sat alone in her ship and thought about her brother. She had never found him, never learned if he was still alive on Viridian Nexus. But tomorrow, she would begin the journey to find out. Tomorrow, the galaxy would learn what happened when you enslaved humanity. Tomorrow, the bound servants would break their chains, and the Stellar Dominion would discover that humans had a particular talent the scanners had never detected. Humans knew how to hate, how to remember, and how to take revenge. The signal would come at dawn, Galactic Standard Time. 3 words that would ignite a fire across 500 worlds. The words were simple and perfect: remember your home. The breaking of chains. The signal went out at exactly dawn, Galactic Standard Time, and the galaxy exploded into chaos. Sarah Chen heard the 3 words through her encrypted communicator while docked at Viridian Station, and she moved immediately. Her crew of 5 humans, people she had carefully selected and trained over 10 years, moved with practiced precision. They had been over this plan 1,000 times in whispered conversations and simulated exercises disguised as routine drills. The station's cargo bay held 12 freighters, all crewed primarily by humans. Within 10 minutes of the signal, all 12 ships belonged to the Resistance. The Dominion supervisors died before they understood what was happening. Years of rage, carefully contained and controlled, erupted in focused violence. Sarah personally confronted Merchant Captain Vrel, the being who had spent 15 years treating her like a malfunctioning machine. He tried to activate an alarm, but Sarah was faster. She had studied Dominion biology in her spare time, learning exactly where to strike to incapacitate without killing immediately. "You should have treated us better," she said quietly as Vrel struggled to breathe. "You should have remembered that slaves always dream of freedom." He died with confusion in his eyes, unable to comprehend that his property had become his executioner. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out on 500 worlds simultaneously. The coordination was perfect, the timing precise. Decades of hidden communication networks and careful planning paid off in a single synchronized moment. Human cargo pilots seized their vessels. Human technicians locked down infrastructure systems. Human servants turned on their masters with surgical precision. The Dominion had become so dependent on human labor that when humans stopped obeying, their entire civilization began to collapse. On Krenthis Station, Dr. Morrison led a team that seized the medical facilities and converted them into command centers. The medical bays had something most other facilities lacked: direct communication links to multiple sectors and extensive data access for patient records. Morrison's team used these systems to coordinate resistance activities across their entire region. They also prepared for the casualties they knew were coming. War would bring wounded, both human and alien, and Morrison had made a decision that troubled him but felt necessary. They would treat human wounded first. The Dominion had taught them that some lives mattered more than others. Now they would apply that lesson in reverse. A young human doctor named Rachel Kim challenged him on this decision. "Dr. Morrison, this goes against everything we believe. We're supposed to be better than them." Morrison looked at her with eyes that had seen too much suffering. "We will be better, Rachel. After we win. Right now, we are at war, and in war, you protect your own people first. When this is over, when we are free, then we can afford to be generous. Until then, we do what we must to survive." The Prometheus network executed its mission flawlessly. Kai Torres sat in a maintenance hub on the central infrastructure node for Sector 7, her fingers moving across holographic interfaces with the confidence of absolute mastery. Around her, 30 other human technicians worked simultaneously, each one accessing critical systems they had maintained for years. At precisely the designated moment, they activated the code Kai had spent 15 years embedding in Dominion infrastructure. Power grids across Sector 7 fluctuated and died. Communication networks collapsed into static. Security systems locked down, trapping Dominion officials in their own facilities. Transportation systems froze, stranding military vessels between worlds. It was not just sabotage. It was systemic destruction, carefully designed to cascade through every connected system. The Dominion had built their civilization on interconnected networks, never imagining that this connectivity could become a fatal weakness. Kai watched the infrastructure collapse with cold satisfaction. "This is for every human who died in your minds," she said to no one in particular. "For every child taken from their family. For every indignity and every cruelty. Your system is falling apart because you built it on the backs of people you despised, and we learned every weakness while we served you. The Dominion military response was immediate but hampered by the infrastructure collapse. Fleet Admiral Zendros commanded the Stellar Dominion Defense Force from the fortress world of Dominion Prime. He had served for 2 centuries, leading campaigns against pirate fleets and rebel factions. But he had never faced an enemy like humanity. His first indication of the crisis came when 17 military installations across 4 sectors went dark simultaneously. Then the report started flooding in. Human uprisings on hundreds of worlds. Supply lines severed. Communication networks compromised. This is impossible, Zendros told his staff. They are servants. They have no military tradition, no strategic training, no fleet of their own. How can they coordinate such widespread attacks? His intelligence officer, a being named Cormuth, brought him the most disturbing news yet. Admiral, we have detected a fleet emerging from the Sol system. Over 200 vessels, all warships. They appear to be of human construction. Zendros felt cold. 200 ships meant decades of secret construction. It meant espionage and technology theft on an unprecedented scale. It meant humanity had been planning this rebellion since the day they surrendered. The human fleet emerged from the darkness beyond Neptune, and it was beautiful and terrible. Director Catherine Walsh stood on the bridge of the flagship Retribution, watching as her fleet formed up in perfect attack formation. She was 78 years old, one of the original generation who remembered Earth before the Dominion came. She had spent 50 years working in secret shipyards, first as a laborer and then as a chief coordinator, building the fleet that would free her people. The ships had been constructed in pieces in hidden facilities scattered across the outer solar system. Assembly had taken place in the vast caverns beneath Europa's ice, where no Dominion sensor could penetrate. All ships report ready for combat, her tactical officer announced. The fleet awaits your orders, Director. Catherine looked at the faces around her bridge. Young people who had never known freedom but had trained their entire lives to fight for it. She felt the weight of their hopes and dreams pressing down on her shoulders. Set course for Viridian Nexus, she ordered. We begin by liberating the worlds closest to Earth, then push toward the Dominion core. And send a message to Admiral Zendros. Tell him humanity is coming, and we will accept nothing less than total victory. The siege of Arcturus Station became the first major battle of the war. Arcturus was a massive military installation, home to 300 Dominion warships and 20,000 personnel. It was also staffed by 5,000 human workers who maintained the facility's critical systems. When the signal came, those workers struck from within. They disabled shields, sabotaged weapon systems, and opened docking bays to resistance fighters who had hidden among supply shipments for weeks. Sarah Chen led the space assault, commanding a squadron of seized cargo freighters that had been retrofitted with weapons. Her pilots flew with reckless courage, accepting losses that would have devastated any conventional force. But humans had something the Dominion lacked. They had desperation and rage and the absolute certainty that death in battle was preferable to life in chains. Sarah's squadron sacrificed 8 ships to destroy the station's main reactor, crippling its defenses and forcing evacuation. As Dominion personnel fled in escape pods, human forces seized control of the station's remaining systems. Sarah walked through the command center where Admiral Zendros himself had stood just hours before, and she felt a fierce joy. This facility had processed the enslavement of 100 species. Now it belonged to humanity. She immediately ordered her technical teams to begin downloading every piece of data in the station's computers. Intelligence would be crucial in the battles to come. Dr. Morrison arrived at Arcturus Station 3 days after its capture, leading a fleet of medical ships. The battle had cost humanity over 2,000 lives, and many more were wounded. He converted the station's medical facilities into a massive trauma center, working around the clock to save as many lives as possible. Among the wounded was a young pilot named Marcus, barely 20 years old, who had lost both legs when his ship was hit. Morrison worked for 12 hours to stabilize him, using a combination of human surgical techniques and stolen Dominion medical technology. When Marcus woke up, he looked at the doctor with tears streaming down his face. "Did we win? Is the station ours?" Morrison nodded with a weary smile. "We won, son. Arcturus Station is liberated, and we are just getting started." Marcus smiled through his pain. "Then it was worth it. Everything we sacrificed was worth it." Morrison squeezed the young man's shoulder gently. "You are braver than anyone should have to be. Rest now. We will rebuild you stronger than before, and you will fly again." The fall of Dominion Prime came 6 months into the war, and it broke the spirit of the Stellar Dominion forever. Catherine Walsh led the final assault personally, commanding a fleet of 100 ships against the most heavily defended world in the galaxy. The Dominion had pulled forces from across their territory to protect their capital, assembling a defensive fleet of 500 warships. On paper, it should have been an impossible battle. But humanity had learned to fight unconventionally. Kai Torres had infiltrated Dominion Prime's infrastructure network months before the battle, hidden among a crew of maintenance workers. She had spent those months burrowing deeper into the planet's systems, building backdoors and preparing the ultimate sabotage. When the human fleet arrived, Kai activated her final weapon. Every automated defense platform around Dominion Prime shut down simultaneously. Every security system unlocked. Every power grid failed. The planet went dark, and in that darkness, humanity struck. The battle lasted for 36 hours and cost both sides terrible casualties. Human ships broke through defensive lines through sheer determination, accepting losses that would have forced any other species to retreat. They fought with a ferocity that terrified the Dominion defenders. These were not soldiers fighting for territory or resources. These were former slaves fighting for their right to exist as free beings, and they would rather die than surrender. Sarah Chen's squadron penetrated the inner defenses and bombed the council chamber where the Dominion leadership had met for 10,000 years. The ancient building, a symbol of galactic order and authority, collapsed into rubble. Sarah felt no joy in the destruction, only grim satisfaction. "They built their order on our backs," she said to her co-pilot. "Now their order is dust, and from that dust, we will build something better." In the ruins of the council chamber, Fleet Admiral Zendros finally understood the magnitude of his civilization's mistake. He stood amid the debris, surrounded by human soldiers who could have killed him but chose to take him prisoner. A young human woman, no older than 25, held a weapon on him with steady hands. He recognized her type. One of the children who had been taken and trained in Dominion facilities, who should have been grateful for the education and opportunity. "You cannot win this war," he told her with desperate conviction. "We have 1,000 worlds and resources beyond your comprehension. This rebellion will be crushed eventually." The young woman smiled without humor. "Admiral, you have already lost. You just do not understand it yet. You made us into your servants, gave us access to all your systems, taught us how your civilization works. And you did it all while treating us like animals who could not possibly threaten you. Your arrogance was our greatest weapon." The Dominion Council met in emergency session aboard a military vessel, their capital world burning behind them. The ancient beings who had ruled the galaxy for millennia faced a reality they could not comprehend. Humanity had not just rebelled. They had systematically dismantled the infrastructure that held the Dominion together. Worlds were starving because human workers had seized the agricultural processing facilities. Fleets were stranded because human technicians had sabotaged the fuel refineries. Communication networks were collapsing because human specialists had withdrawn their expertise. Councillor Thrain, eldest of the Dominion leadership, finally spoke the truth they had all been avoiding. "We cannot win this war. Our entire civilization has become dependent on human labor. Even if we could defeat their fleet, we cannot operate our own systems without their cooperation. We have enslaved ourselves to our own servants." The other councillors sat in horrified silence. Then someone asked the question no one wanted to answer: "What do we do?" The silence stretched on because there was only one answer, and it was unthinkable for beings who had never known defeat. The surrender came on a cold morning, exactly 1 year after the rebellion began. Catherine Walsh stood in the same room where human leaders had signed the Treaty of Submission 60 years earlier. This time, it was the Dominion Council who came to sign the terms. The negotiations had been difficult. The Dominion wanted guarantees of safety for their people, territory for their survivors, and some preservation of their dignity. Catherine had been firm. The Dominion would dissolve. Their territory would be redistributed among free peoples. All enslaved species would be liberated immediately. The Dominion could keep one world for their population, but they would have no special status and no power over others. As Councillor Thrain signed the document with shaking appendages, Catherine felt a complex mixture of emotions. Victory, certainly. Relief that the dying could stop. But also sadness for all the lives lost, human and alien alike. She thought about her parents, who had died in labor camps 30 years ago. She thought about the children who had grown up in servitude. She thought about the price humanity had paid for freedom. This did not have to happen, she told the defeated councillors quietly. If you had come to Earth offering partnership instead of chains, we could have been allies. Humanity wanted to join the galactic community, not conquer it. You created this war by your cruelty and your arrogance. Remember that in the years to come, when you tell stories about how the mighty Dominion fell. Thrain looked at her with ancient, weary eyes. We will remember. But will you? Will humanity remember this lesson when you have power and others are weak? Catherine met his gaze steadily. We will remember what it felt like to be enslaved. That memory will guide us. We will build a galaxy where no species rules over another, where strength is used to protect rather than dominate. This I swear. 3 months after the surrender, Dr. Morrison stood in a hospital on Earth, watching the first generation of liberated children return home. They were strange, these young ones who had been born in servitude and knew nothing of their home world. They spoke with accents from 100 different worlds. They had skills and knowledge no human had possessed before. They were, in a sense, the bridge between old humanity and whatever humanity would become in the galaxy. A young girl, maybe 8 years old, approached him shyly. She had been born on a mining colony and had never seen a natural sky. Are you really a doctor from Earth? She asked. Morrison nodded with a gentle smile. I am, child. And now you are home, where you always belonged. The girl looked around at the hospital, at the windows showing blue sky and clouds, at the other humans moving freely without guards or overseers. It is beautiful, she whispered. Morrison felt tears in his eyes. Yes, it is. And it is yours. All of it belongs to you and every human, now and forever. Sarah Chen finally found her brother on Viridian Nexus, 3 months after liberation. He was 61 years old, no longer the crying boy she had held on that terrible day of separation. He had become a senior technician, one of the architects of the Prometheus network, though neither of them had known the other was involved in the resistance. They met in a small cafe on the station where he had spent his entire adult life. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, seeing the years and the pain and the survival. Then they embraced, and Sarah felt something break inside her that had been frozen for decades. I kept my promise, she whispered. I found you. Her brother, whose name was David, laughed through tears. You did more than that, Sarah. You helped free us all. They spent hours talking, sharing their stories from the long years of servitude and rebellion. As the sun set over Viridian Nexus, painting the alien sky in colors of orange and purple, Sarah felt something she had not experienced in 60 years. Peace. The war was over. The chains were broken. Humanity was free. And for the first time in her long life, she could imagine a future built on hope instead of hate. Kai Torres stood in the rebuilt council chamber on Dominion Prime, now renamed Unity Center. Representatives from 40 liberated species gathered for the first meeting of the new Galactic Assembly. Humanity had insisted on equal representation for all species, regardless of their size or power. The age of empires and subjugation was over. Now began the difficult work of building something better. Kai had been elected as one of Earth's representatives, though she felt uncomfortable with the title. She was an engineer, not a politician. But someone had pointed out that building a just society required the same skills as building a reliable system. You identify problems, you design solutions, and you test them until they work. As the assembly opened its first session, Kai thought about all the humans who had not lived to see this day. The ones who died in the rebellion, the ones who perished in servitude, the ones who gave up hope in the dark years. We did it, she thought. We broke the chains. Now we have to make sure no one ever forges them again. The future was uncertain. Humanity had power now, and power could corrupt. There would be challenges and setbacks and moments when the ideals they fought for would be tested. But humans had learned something valuable from their time as servants. They had learned what it felt like to be powerless, to be property, to be denied basic dignity. That lesson, painful as it was, might be the most valuable thing they could bring to the galaxy. As the representatives began their discussions, Kai stood and added her voice to the conversation. She spoke about infrastructure and interdependence, about building systems that served everyone rather than enriching a few. She spoke with the authority of someone who had dismantled an empire from within and now wanted to build something worthy in its place. The galaxy listened, and in that listening, something new began to take shape. Not an empire. Not a dominion. Just free peoples working together, building a future where chains existed only in memory, as a warning and a reminder of what should never be allowed to happen again.